Actually, I am very happy to be here, to come here to North Beach to get to know your group. It's been a while that I know Abigail, but we never had the chance before to visit, and I'm very pleased with that, with the opportunity, and I thank you for the invitation. I thank the Spirit mentors that are responsible for this group for allowing me to be here today and to talk about what is the most important thing in my life, that is Spiritism. Because truly I would say without Spiritism, I'm not so sure whether I would have a life or not. So I think it's a great opportunity for all of those that at this moment in this lifetime we are looking already for something more, something beyond the physicality, the material things, which is absolutely not condemned by Spiritism. In Spiritism, I think the best recipe is to try to live life in balance. Most of the people, they live 99% just looking at what is around them without thinking about what they really are as spirits, as immortal spirits. There is this great taboo to talk about death. No one wants to think about dying, but it's one thing that is going to happen to each one of us. So to have knowledge, to have understanding about the immortality of the soul, about ourselves, is something very important. As you could see, I was blessed to be taken to a Spiritist center at a very early age. My grandfather was a Spiritist. I never met him. He died when my mother was still very young. But she made a great impact in her life. And when I was about 10 years old, she started taking me to the Spiritist center as well. And it was love at first sight. What else can I say? Allow me to talk a little bit about myself, because it's what actually gave rise for this talk. When I wrote this talk, I was thinking about some of the experiences that I went through. I'm still very young. So she took me there. I fell in love with that. I started reading that, and I was very religious already at the time. I studied in a Catholic school. I was very well known around the school because I would be staying with the nuns all the time, helping in everything they had to do in the church, and all of those stuff. I was always very impassioned with religion for a while. So, but there were things that intrigued me. And I had my first communion when I was 6 years old. And I was granted actually permission by the bishop of the city to have it at 6 years old, because you had to be 7. I don't know how it is here in the US. But then they granted me permission to do that. And then I was studying all of those things about God, about Jesus. But there was 2 things that were really bothering me in all of that. One thing is, I couldn't believe that God was this old man sitting in a throne and just commanding everything. And the second thing that troubled me a lot was I couldn't imagine that I could die. I think I already thought too much about myself, that the world could not live without Jussara. So I could not understand. I mean, I could not accept, this is it. It is death, is the end of the world, or the end of Jussara. And then when my mother took me to the Spiritist center and I started, learning and hearing about immortality and a different perspective of God, then I really felt at home. I started reading a lot and going to meetings. And in my teenager years, only going to the Spiritist center was not enough. We had small groups of study. And there was this particular one that was held in the house of people that at the time I considered to be elderly people. They were not much older than I am today. So I can only imagine, they were not that old thinking better, But and so they would guide us in the studies, and it was very, very productive, a very small group, serious group study. And one day I went to the owner of the house and said, "Oh my God, how wonderful that you are a Spiritist and you have all of this knowledge and this understanding." And he looked at me and he said, "But I'm not a Spiritist. I'm trying to become one." And then I have to confess to you that I didn't understand what he was saying. And I start thinking, am I in the wrong place? We are here studying Spiritism, and now he tells me that he's not a Spiritist. He's trying to become one. I couldn't understand that much. Only with time, I understood what he was trying to say. Because it is really an art, becoming a Spiritist. It entails to follow certain parameters that are very necessary, and they are the crucial points of Spiritism. And it's in honor of him that I actually start thinking about this talk and meditating about what would be and what would be the necessary requirements for us to actually and truly say that we understand Spiritism and that we are in the process of actually embracing and becoming a true Spiritist. First of all, we start by saying and understanding that we are citizens of the universe. So there are no need for us to try to label ourselves. We may label ourselves in this lifetime and say, okay, I'm an American, I was born in a certain part of the US, or I'm a Brazilian, I was born in a certain city. When we do that, we start, sometimes separating one for each other. And the thing is, when we think about what we really represent as immortal spirits, we should each time more try to prevent, having labels that perhaps will separate us from each other. We understand that we are all children of God. So some of us will be having experiences in this lifetime in different places, in different situations. We will have different professions, always with the aim of helping us to grow and to evolve. René Descartes, he said something that is actually a phrase, a statement that is a precursor of Spiritism. He said, "I think, therefore I am." Understanding that in order for us to consider being a spirit, we have to have the ability of thinking. And Kardec, in the Spirits, already says in the Spirits book that spirits may be defined as intelligent beings of the creation. They populate the universe outside the material world. It's a little different because I prepared this in the Apple computer, and so that's why it's a little fuzzy here. So he's saying here that as spirits, we are the intelligent beings. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." It's the same thing that the spirits are telling us. So we are the part of the creation that have the possibility of thinking, of growing, of evolving, of understanding everything that is around us, and even reach the point where we are going to be understanding the Creator. Nowadays, actually, we don't have much a clue about the Creator. We can look at the creation, we feel astonished and amazed with what we see, but to tell that we can understand, that we can define, or we can say that it's an old man like Santa Claus sitting on a chair and ruling the world, we already have passed this phase, and we understand. And God has not diminished before our eyes because of that. On the contrary, now we see all that it represents God. I don't know if you had the opportunity of going to that exhibition, Body. Not many people like to go there because if you don't like to see bodies and inside the bodies, it can be a little scary. But it's something so amazing. When we look at that and we look at ourselves of how this machine works, at that instance, I don't know how someone that looking at that cannot believe in a creator, because it's extraordinary to say, to try to define the idea. So one of the first prerogatives for us to become a Spiritist is reason. Reason is a very important, fundamental point on Spiritism. And we are going to explain why. It's so important that Kardec, when he put together the Gospel according to Spiritism, in his first page he wrote that unshakable faith is only that which can meet reason face to face in every human epoch. In Spiritism, we talk a lot about this phrase, about reason, talking that Kardec was a scholar. He had a lot of knowledge. He was a mathematician. He was a teacher. He was a translator. He spoke several languages. He was a man of science of his time. And of course, it seems that if you put 2 + 2, of course, he had to be a man of reason. But to him, reason was much more important than we can think or that we can imagine, just related to his education. Why? Because he lived in the time of the Sacred Alliance that was signed among some countries in 1815, and at that time Kardec would be 11 years old, where the domination of the Christian principles became a symbol of conservatism and repression in great part of Europe. So the schools were forbade to teach philosophy, language, history, moral and political science, and anything that relates to analytical thought. So this is the ideal school for my son. Or for many children in the country, because you know what we have, what gym here, what else do we have, right? And not so much perhaps because there may involve some calculus or something, weight and etc. So Kardec was the only child. His parents are as well were educated people. So what did they had to do? They had to send Kardec to study in Switzerland, because there they were not bound by this Sacred Alliance. Many times when we talk about Kardec and we say, oh, Kardec went to study in Switzerland with the great master Pestalozzi, we think like perhaps nowadays that we send our children to study abroad to have a better education because it's, you know, in fashion, because it's chic. No, it was because if he stayed in France, there was no chance for him to receive a formal education. So now you imagine his parents having him as an only child, having to send him to study in Switzerland. Fortunately, it was in an area of Switzerland that they spoke French, but it's still a little German, where he had then to learn how to speak German as well. And he would be separate from his parents. Why? Because of dogmas, because of lack of reason in religion, in philosophical thoughts. So this is a man that was marked in his childhood about what dogmas, lack of reason in beliefs represent in the life of families. That's the main reason why when Kardec was invited by the higher spirits to put together, to codify Spiritism, he would then state that without reason, Without following science in each step of the way, we wouldn't be doing or paying any homage to the beauty of the teachings of the spirits. So the Spiritist reasons and chooses what is best for him or her in all sectors of life. The Spiritist does not choose a belief, a philosophy by decree, by inheritance, by conviction achieved through reason, exercising their right to think. So sometimes we want to, and we feel very frustrated because we want the whole world to know about that. We want our family to know about that, our children, our parents. And sometimes they do not have the same way of reasoning that we have. So Spiritism cannot be embraced by decree. I cannot tell my son, you have to be a Spiritist because this is the best thing in the world, and your mom and your father are Spiritists, and you have to be a Spiritist. We do not live in this time. And without reasoning, without embracing, without understanding, we would never be capable of embracing all the teachings, all the knowledge that we gather from Spiritism. And one thing when we talk about the art, it's very easy for us just to say, oh, what's your philosophy? What's your belief? And people say, oh, I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic. And then when you ask them, they will say, sometimes I can be very naughty, I say. And when I tell people that I follow something that they don't know very well what it is, or some that think they do not appreciate that. And I say, oh, I'm a Spiritist. And what are you? And they say, a Catholic. I say, oh, really? And do you go to church every week? They look at me as if I'm an alien, Look, what are you talking about? Go to the church every week. I know a lot of Catholics that they go to the church 3 times a year tops if there is a wedding, a baptism, or a funeral. The important thing is for us to embrace the knowledge that religion, philosophies can bring to us. And how can we do that if we do not follow or if we do not study the precepts they have? In Spiritism, actually, we always emphasize the need to internalize the knowledge that we receive. Paul of Tarsus said, I have the right to do anything, but not everything is beneficial. So we understand that we cannot impose things, and one of the greatest things about Spiritism, when it teaches us about free will, is exactly to explain to us what Paul is trying to explain here. So is there anything that Spiritism prohibits you to do? Absolutely nothing. Nothing. And if you hear the contrary, perhaps, that person may be misguided and or not yet understand quite well what is Spiritism. Spiritism does not forbid anything, but it tells you, it teaches you what is good for you and what is not good for you. And then you have the opportunity to exert your power of the free will and to put in practice whatever you think is best for you. So that's why this is a very important statement when we are thinking about reasoning. What is in my best interest? To do that, but what are the consequences? Because at the same time that we know about free will, we also know about the law of cause and effect. And the law of cause and effect, I call this a boomerang. It's like, when you throw a boomerang in the world, what happens? It comes back to you. This is one thing that we all are in agreement. So if I send a thought, an action to the world, it's coming back to me. So I can do everything that I want, but there are things that are not for my own good. So we have to think about that. We talked a lot about reason, but how can we achieve reason? How can I determine if this is in my best interest? If this is good or not? If this is a belief that I want to follow? Because faith has to follow reason in each and every time that we live. So without studying, we are not capable of reaching this ability of reasoning. If I just heard about it, read a brochure about it, how can I have an opinion about it? How can I say this is true, this is not true, this is good, this is not good? So study is a crucial point in Spiritism, and the Spiritists should learn to love this, to study. This is one of the reasons why we don't have that many people in the Spiritist Center. We, sometimes do not want to spend that much time studying or reading something that is going to be, moving us a little bit away from what we believe in terms of materiality, in terms of, grabbing things. It's more abstract. So this is why also it is so important for us to have the knowledge. Without at least the basic knowledge, how can we reason? How can we have an opinion? How can we decide if this is good or not for me? And in the Gospel according to Spiritism, in a message dictated by Jesus, they call the Spirit of Truth, it says, the Spiritists love one another is the first precept. Educate yourselves is the second. We know that without the two wings of involvement, we are not capable of reaching the high realms of life. Love is absolutely important in terms of Spiritism, in terms of our personal involvement, but without the education, without the understanding, how can we have the strength to actually follow, to pursue a certain path? So this is why this study is so important. But when we talk about reading, when we talk about studying, we have to be very careful. Nowadays, there are many people writing books about Spiritism or receiving messages from spirits, and so they already put it in. Today it's so easy to publish, and you publish a book from the spirit, whatever the name the spirit presents. And we learn from reason with Kardec that it's not because you're dead that you have all the knowledge, that you have all the understanding. And so it's not because you're a spirit dictating a book that what the message you're bringing is something worth reading. So we have to be very careful with what we read. And in this sense, if we think about the good publications, only for Kardec we have 30 publications. Chico has published over 450 books, none of them for personal use or that brought any kind of profit to him, only spiritual ones. And Divaldo is almost 300 books. So it's only here we have almost 1,000 books. And if we put together Leon Denis, Gabriel Delany, Camilo Flammarion, Raul Teixeira, we have Lírio Cerqueira, we have so many great books, literature, for us to occupy ourselves for more than one lifetime. So let us also be very careful with what are the books we are going to be recommending, what are the books the Spiritist Center are going to be offering, because we are responsible for what we are offering the public. Once we put that in our shelves, people will assume that it's, well, if the direction of the house decide that those are the books they want here, it's because this book is good. And sometimes we see places that do not even went to the trouble of reading the book first before putting it there. And it can happen to us as well, because we don't, I mean, today we do have many books in English already, but 10 years ago we had 5 books. And so we were, of course, eager to have books in English, and perhaps people would not be that careful in seeing, well, it's not because it's in English too that is a good book. We always have to pay attention to that. So without the study, we cannot have the reason. A scientist of this country, Malcolm Gladwell, he said that in order for us to consider ourselves expert in anything, we need to put 10,000 hours in it. Unless you have 10,000 hours in a certain area, you are still not considered, according to him, not considered to be an expert. So I did a little math and trying to see what this would represent in terms of Spiritism. I started a little ambitious, and then I said, well, if I study dedicate 3 hours a day for Spiritism, how long it will take me to complete the 10,000 hours? And it was a little over 9 years. And I said, well, 9 years, not that bad. But come on, let's be honest. Who is going to be dedicating 3 hours a day, every day, for 9 years to the studies of Spiritism? So I cut that in half and said, well, 1.5 hours is more feasible. So we're talking about almost 20 years for us. So we see how much, the dedication that we have to have, the understanding to the desire to understand profoundly what we are doing, not only in the field of Spiritism, but as I said, in any other field of life, it's so important to us. So the best medicine to prevent spiritual ignorance would always be for us to understand and to study, because there are people that come and tell us things about spiritual things. Can be so not true. I remember once a very sad case, a person that I knew, she lost her 3 or 4 years old. She drowned in the pool. And when she lost her child, she was pregnant. She was 2 to 3 months pregnant. So as you can imagine, she was devastated with the loss of this child. And she went to a place in Brazil, to a spiritual place, to find a certain consolation, or to see if she could get some enlightenment, to know about her child. And then the person told her the following, that she shouldn't worry about the loss of her child, because her child that had just died would be returning in the child that she was already expecting. And her father that was deceased, follow me because it's quite confusing, this story, that had already deceased, was saving the place of the pregnancy and the fetus, because he knew the daughter was going to die, and then as soon as the daughter died, he would remove himself and give the place to the child that has died, as if it was a chair, right? So you save this chair for me. When I arrive, you stand up and I go and sit in your chair. I mean, what can I say? That's absolutely horrible, completely wrong. We learn in the Spirit's book how we plan our reincarnation, how we connect with the future body, molecule by molecule. I cannot just remove myself in the middle of the process and say, please take my place. So that's why study is so important. Because people will be telling us absurd things. And then we have to use reason. And we have to assess the knowledge that we have. But having said all that, the Honorable Spirit Bezerra de Menezes in the book Madness and Obsession says the following. The living of the Spiritist tenets are pivotal to the true acquisition of illuminative values that ennoble the spirit. As a result, as respectable as the theories can be, the concepts, untested in practice, become intellectual adornment to vanity and prove useless for those who endure urgent need to solve the challenges ahead. So what Dr. Bezerra is telling us here, yes, the study, the knowledge is important. But more important yet is for us to put in practice what we have learned. We cannot, in a Spiritist center, for instance, or any house of assistance, receive someone that is in despair and we say, oh, take these 5 books of the codification and read and come back to talk to me, I don't know, a year, 2 years later. You don't solve the problem. You are not being compassionate. You are not practicing the most important motto in Spiritism: without charity there is no salvation. So if we do not exercise the love and attention and care and compassion towards our brothers and sisters, it means that we have not understood what Spiritism is about. We hear a lot about Kardec and how he was, this very strict man, and how he was, like I said, a scholar, and the brilliancy of his writings in compiling the doctrine, and in the 12 years of the Spiritist Review. But very often we miss his charitable actions, his compassionate soul. And the more we read about him and the way that he describes his experience, especially in the books of Spiritist Voyage, we see how loving and caring a person he was. And to the point of saying, if I had to choose between 2 Spiritist centers, one that dedicated only to study, and one that perhaps do not have that much opportunity of study, but that practice charity, I would stay with the second one. So we see how important it is for us to do that, because it's when we are actually showing that we have understood what Spiritism is about and that we have internalized its concepts. Quite often we say, without charity there is no salvation, not knowing what that means. Why there is no salvation? We are still thinking in a way that we had from dogmas before, that their God is going to come to us, oh, my loving child, you're no longer going to be punished because you are charitable, you are good, and so you're saved. It's not that. It means that when we are capable of already caring enough about our brothers and sisters, it means that the transformation, the inner transformation that we are doing within ourselves are taking us in the path of us saving ourselves. Because a person that is completely selfish, a person that only cares about the things of this world, that is only, vain, that lives basically a material life, they couldn't care less about the well-being of others. But those that are evolving in soul, that already have a Christian way of living, a good way of living, that understand that there is nothing that separates us from each other, they are going little by little to be giving to those gestures of tolerance, of compassion, of charity, of helping one another. And this is the best thermometer to tell in which part of the scale of spirituality we are. Just look at how you think about others, how much compassion you have for your brothers and sisters, and then you will know how much farther away you are or we are from becoming a more evolved spirit. So, in this sense, without love, without giving up to our brothers and sisters, we may have all the knowledge, but we will lack the practice. And we cannot fly with just one wing. We need the other as well. So balancing knowledge and love and learning and giving, it's very, very important. So the Spiritist love, or better yet, is willing to love, because we are still trying to understand what love is, and I mean, it's just one word to express such a noble and great feeling. Not only our loved ones, but we start loving humanity, not only our piece of land, but the whole earth and the whole universe, creation of the Father. This is why we started saying that we should try to eliminate those labels, because when we start separating ourselves by religion, even by what kind of football team or soccer team we have, or by race, by gender, by this and that, we separate ourselves from each other. Once some people asked me to write an article about the differences between Spiritism and spiritualism that is very big in this country. I paused and I thought for a minute and said, you know what, I'm not going to write this article, because I don't want to write an article that will point out the differences that we have. I can write an article about what we have in common. Because when I write something, say, I'm different from you because, and the way we think, when someone is different from you, you are almost saying, I'm good, you're not, because you think different than I do. So, but what do we have in common? And so this is how we should look at the world instead of, criticizing. It's so easy for us to point our things